this section in your book. That's chapter 3, and hopefully you will have looked at and read this, and I'm going to be reinforcing some of the concepts that you've seen. The intention of the recorded lecture is really to fill in the blanks and make sure that you understand some of the main concepts that I'll be putting out. So today, as I said, we're going to be talking about sensation and perception, and that starts with the S, or the sensation part of it, which is going to be starting with your senses. And we're going to be talking today about vision as the first sense. Vision is obviously takes place through the eye, and we know that the light passes through the pupil, travels through the cornea, the lens, and then is refracted to the back of the eyeball, where the retina takes place. And the retina is on the very back of the eyeball. The retina is made up of cells and fibers, and these cells and fibers have very specific names. So these are concepts that you'll want to know. The rods are the black and white cells. They are cylindrical in nature, and they are sensitive to dim light and black and white. Okay, the cones are tapered in nature, and they are sensitive to color and bright light. So the rods have a different shape than the cones. The rods are barrel shaped, the cones are tapered. Okay, and as you might guess, there are some species that have a different amount of rods and cones within their retinas. Why would that be? Well, the reason for that is because if you have an animal that's nocturnal, that exists mostly at night, they would need to be more sensitive to dim light and black and whites. Therefore, they'd want to have more rods in their retinas, and that's how they evolve. So animals like a possum, raccoon, who are out a lot overnight, would have basically more rods in their retinas than, say, a human being does. But conversely, humans and animals that survive mostly during the day would have more cones. Uh, a bird such as an eagle would have a lot of cones in their retina because they have very, very sharp vision. They can distinguish colors quite a bit. So they need to be able to focus from a very great height, and that's how they hunt. They fly and they hunt, and they can see at great distances in great detail down below to the ground. So their retinas would actually have far more cones in them. That should make some sense to you. So the big issue that you want to be aware of is that the light coming through the eyeball gets refracted or bent to the back of the eyeball on exactly the right angle, right? And the reason that this is important is because if it doesn't hit the retina at exactly the right angle, then you're going to need to correct the angle. And the way to do that, of course, would be through wearing glasses or contacts or something that's going to change the angle of the refraction to the back of the eyeball. That's how your vision becomes crystal clear. So that's the vision part. The other thing that I wanted to tell you is that once the image is recorded into the retina, it then gets changed to electrical impulses. Okay, the process of changing the image is called transduction. That means that it's changed from an external input of some sort into an electrical impulse. Once it's changed into electrical impulses, it can go along the optic nerve, and the optic nerve will translate and send the electronic messages to the brain, and that's how we perceive vision. Okay? If at any point any part of the system breaks down, like if there's a detached retina or floaters that cross into the eyeball, those can interfere with the vision process. Second sense we're going to be talking about is the sense of hearing. Hearing is measured in sound waves. That is vibrations within the atmosphere. And sound travels at 760 miles per hour, pretty fast, not as fast as light though. And sound intensity is measured in decibels or dBs. Um, and that's how we tell the loudness. The greater the decibels, the greater the sound wave is. And that's how you get a louder sound. We know that overstimulation of the ears or your hearing is potentially harmful. People that work in high decibel settings can end up with permanent hearing loss. So if you go to the airport, you can see that people that work around the airplanes have headphones that are noise canceling that covers their ears, because it would be very harmful to be exposed to this ongoing. There were a lot of rock stars from the 70s and 80s before all musicians would wear earpieces. And when they were exposed to loud music right next to the instruments, they ended up with hearing damage. And Pete Townsend, for instance, the guitarist for The Who, famously has tinnitus or tinnitus that affects his hearing ongoing every day because of exposure to loud sounds. So you want to avoid consistent exposure to loud sounds, including having headphones in that are too loud that expose you to potential damage. It's very important. There are three principal parts to your hearing. You have the external ear, which collects the energy. You have the middle ear, which transmits the energy down the pathway. And then you have the inner ear, where transduction takes place, the translation of the nerve impulses that go to the brain. So we're going to break that down for you so that you have a basic understanding of how sound travels into how we perceive sound. So the pinna is the outer ear, right? The pinna. And the pinna is the collector. This shape is perfect for collecting sound and funneling it down into the middle ear and ultimately the inner ear. And if you put your hand behind your ear like this and talk, you can tell that you actually do collect more sound by extending your pinna with your hand, right? You become a better sound collector, and the volume does get a little louder. And in fact, early hearing aids really had to do with extending the pinna like we're doing with our hand and perceiving the sound in that way. Trivia question for you. What would happen if you did a Vincent van Gogh and cut your pinna off? Would you still hear? Well, the answer is you would still perceive some sound, but if you weren't collecting all the sound, it would sound like a whoosh going past your ear, right? It wouldn't be collecting it as efficiently, and you'd have a lot of trouble distinguishing sounds because all the sounds in the environment would be impacting you. So you'd have some hearing, but not complete. So the outer ear, which is the pinna, as we've established, collects the sound and sends it down into the auditory canal, and this leads to the eardrums. The eardrums are the entrance to the middle ear. The eardrum vibrates back and forth when it's stimulated by the pressure of the sound waves, and it goes back and forth like the skin on a drum, which is why you call it the eardrum, of course, and it's such an important part of the hearing process. This thin membrane, then, the eardrum, vibrates, and then it passes the sound wave down to three of the smallest bones that exist in the body. These bones collectively are called the ossicles. They do have individual names, as you'll see in the book: the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. But that's not really important. What's important is these are three of the smallest bones in the body, and they help to conduct the sound into the inner ear. The inner ear is made up basically of the cochlea, right? The cochlea are three fluid-filled canals, and when this fluid is vibrated, it then stimulates the hair cell fibers within the cochlea. The hair cell fibers initiate the transduction. Remember, I told you in vision that transduction is the translation of the stimulus into electric impulses that the brain can then understand, right? So you need to have this translation so that the brain can comprehend the sound. So the hair cell fibers getting vibrated stimulate the auditory nerve. The electronic impulses get translated and sent to the brain along the auditory nerve, and then we comprehend sound. Um, as you probably know, certain animals are more sensitive to um, different pitches of sound, right? So human beings have less sensitivity to the high range, as for instance, than dogs do. That's why they have the dog whistle. So our sensitivity is not as great as some of the other members of the animal kingdom. So the next sense we're going to talk about is the sense of smell. Smell is what I call the most underrated sense. Why do I say that? Because smell, first of all, often triggers behaviors, and sometimes we don't even know about it. It's more subconscious than we realize with smell. Also, it takes a very small amount of scent to affect our behavior. So if we smell something really bad and rancid, we want to leave. If we smell somebody with body odor, we don't want to be next to them. If we smell something really good, we want to move closer to it. So all of these are related to our sense of smell. Smell is extremely necessary also for the sense of taste, right? So we know that if you've ever had a cold, that when you try to taste something without your sense of smell, it's very difficult to taste anything. So that's why I call smell the underrated sense. Um, like I said, well, let me give you the process of smell. So the air currents come into the nostrils, right? And they go into the upper nasal cavity. And this stimulates olfactory receptors. The upper part of the nose is where the molecules dissolve into mucus, and that triggers the transduction or the translation of smell directly to the brain, and the brain is able to comprehend once that translation has taken place. So you wondered what the mucus was for up deep in your nasal cavity, and there is a purpose, and it is help process and send the smell to the brain. So I told you before that smell helps to trigger behavior. And I'm going to give you three very specific examples of that and see if this rings true in your life. Um, First thing smell tends to stimulate is the sense of salivation, the behavior of salivation, right? Not just in humans, but also in animals. Our sense of smell triggers our sense of salivation, right? Why do we salivate when we smell something really good? Like if you walk by a pizzeria or bakery and you say, that smells good, I want something to eat. And the reason for that, very simply, is that salivation is actually the beginning of our digestive process. So, because the sense of smell stimulates the start of that, that's what gives you the salivation. So, oftentimes, our sense of smell gives us salivation, right? The second thing that smell actually stimulates, the behavior it stimulates, is the approach avoidance response. And so this ties into a lot of things. As I told you before, if we smell something really bad or something dangerous like fire, we tend to want to run away from it, get away from it. Garbage, skunk, fire, um, all types of bad smells are there to warn us that we might want to avoid it or go away from them. Um, the opposite of that is, of course, if we smell something really good, like good food cooking or even a good, nice perfume, we want to approach. We want to get closer to that smell because it has to do with attraction in many ways. And this is true even in the animal kingdom. Much of the mating that takes place, the mating behavior that takes place, has to do with response to pheromones. Pheromones are natural smells that come from the body that help to attract a mate. And in the animal kingdom, this is oftentimes how a mate is selected, through the sense of smell. Um, in humans, I believe that sense of smell is related quite strongly to attraction. How do I know this? Because the perfume and cologne industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. People are trying to smell good, to use scents that attract um, the opposite sex, the same sex, whatever, just to say that you want to smell nice and have that as part of the attraction. Um, in blind studies that have been done with scent, it turns out that the scent of a person's significant other is very important in the attraction level. So, um, the sense of smell turns out to be extremely important in our behavior. The third behavior that sense of smell would stimulate is the starting of a train of thought. It's very common that we smell something and it reminds us of something. It stimulates something from our past, something recent that we've smelled. Smell helps us to make associations. So it may be something as simple as it smells like my grandmother's house when she was cooking meatballs. It smells like my aunt's house because it smells like mothballs. It smells like my ex-boyfriend. It smells like my dog. There are many different roles that smell can play in starting a train of thought. But it turns out that smell can be very strongly associated with memories and things that we recall. Of course, you know that many times they give the dog the scent of the person that they're searching for, and then they can then go out and find someone just based upon the scent that they might find in their shirt or whatever. So this is a very important role for scent within the animal kingdom. So that leads us into the next section, which is the sense of taste, right? And as we said, taste needs smell in order to function, because when you have a cold, you can't taste very well. So taste comes quite a bit from our taste buds. So we know that those play a very important role in us having the sensation of taste. Our taste buds are found, for the most part, in these bumps on the tongue, and these are called papillae. The papillae are these bumps on the tongue that are richly populated with your taste buds. And so everybody has them. We are born with quite a few taste buds, and then, of course, we do things to potentially kill them off, like we eat spicy food, or we smoke, or we drink alcohol, all of which contribute to losing taste buds. Um, when a child is young and they have not ruined their taste buds, so to speak, like adults have, they are much more sensitive to taste sensations. If you've ever seen a young child react to a little squirt of lemon on the pinky, um, they make a face. That's pretty pronounced, and that's because their sensation of taste is even that much more pronounced because they have so many taste buds. Um, Taste is not as sensitive as smell, as you know, and people are more sensitive to acid and bitter than they are to sweet and salty. Well, what's the reason for this increased sensation to um, acid and bitter? And if you think about it from a survival standpoint, it's probably makes sense because most things that would be poison or bad for you to ingest would have an acid or bitter taste. And so because of that, you would be more likely to pooey, spit it out. And so the uh, acid and bitter is more sensitive than the sweet and salty, which are more likely to be ingested. The five basic taste qualities Salt, sour, sweet, bitter, and umami. Umami is the meaty, cheesy taste sensation, and that one is relatively more newly discovered than some of the other ones. We also know that different parts of the tongue are more sensitive to different tastes, right? So the bitter taste buds or taste sensations are more toward the back of the tongue. This makes sense if you think about things like that would be bitter tasting, like let's say liquor. If you've gone ever seen um, wine or whiskey being tasted, and what do? They swish it around in order to get the smell, the bouquet they call it, because that's certainly an essential part, as we've talked about, of the taste sensation. And then when they drink it, they actually pour it into the back of their throat, and they oftentimes will gargle it and spit it out. They don't even swallow it. And the reason for this is because liquor is considered a bitter sensation, and so you're going to get more of the enhanced taste in the back of the throat. That's why they do that. So if you're looking to drink a lot of whiskey or wine, don't go to a tasting because for the most part they just spit it out. Um, the other sensations that we can find, the sweet is more found, the taste buds are more found in the tip of the tongue, right? And that makes sense because we lick our lollipops and our ice cream with the tip of our tongue. The sour is found more on the sides of the tongue, the sensations, and the salt portion is on the tip and some of the sides. So all you have to do to test all this is to make yourself a margarita with the salt, and you can try the taste buds all over your tongue. Um, Not advocating that you drink alcohol, but I'm just saying you can have a virgin margarita if you want to do that and experience all of your different taste bud areas. And now we're going to go on to touch or skin sensation. You know that the skin is considered the largest organ in the body, right? It's a giant sense organ. And the skin senses are distinguished between pressure or touch, cold, warmth, and pain. And we are going to distinguish some of these sensations for you. The skin is more sensitive in some areas than in others, is more innervated. This concept is called punctuate sensitivity. Punctuate sensitivity. The importance of punctuate sensitivity is for our survival, for evolutionary sake. We were made so that we have areas that are more sensitive or more innervated than other areas on our skin and on our tongue and body. The most sensitive areas, you could try to guess some of them. Obviously, the tip of the tongue and the lips are extremely sensitive and innervated. It's probably not coincidental that our mating ritual begins with kissing, which is involved with the lips and the tongue. That probably is not coincidental, since those are such sensitive areas for us. Maybe if we were sensitive on the top of our heads, we'd be kissing like the cone heads, sort of rubbing the top of our head together. Um, but we don't. We use our lips and our tongue. Other areas of sensitivity, of extreme sensitivity on our bodies, include obviously the genitalia, so that again, it's responsible for the mating ritual. And other areas would be your fingers, your finger extremities, and your toes. And why those areas? Well, again, simply speaking, when we explore new sensations, we're using the tips of our fingers, we're using the toes. There's literally an expression for dipping your toes in the water, and that's where that comes from. And that's because our toes are extremely sensitive, both to temperature and pressure and things like that. So those are specifically sensitive areas because they're more innervated. Um, let's talk a little bit about the sensation of pain now. Pain is an interesting thing, sort of the opposite of pleasure, if you will. And Why do we have pain? Well, pain sends a message to the brain, and having some pain is adaptive. Why do we say it's adaptive? Well, people who don't have pain sensitivity, and is a condition where people do not have pain sensitivity, are actually at more risk. Why are they at more risk? Because think about getting in a hot shower, and if it's scalding you on your back and you can't feel pain, you may not step out of it and end up burning your skin. If you think about cutting a bagel and you don't feel pain, well, you get the idea. I'm not going to finish that story for the squeamish, but you get the idea that pain is very important for us to be able to withdraw or stop doing what we're doing in order to not injure ourselves further. So actually having pain is adaptive in that sense. We operate on what we call a pain gate system, and what we mean by that is all along the spinal cord, there are pain gates that allow the transmission up the spinal cord to the brain of the sensation of pain. When those pain gates are blocked, you do not sense the pain that you're experiencing because the brain has to actually have the electronic impulses, the translation of what the pain feels like in order for you to sense it. So when somebody is giving birth and has an epidural, it blocks the transmission of the pain. The sensation is still there when you're giving birth, but it does not translate as pain in the same way because the pain gate is blocked. It turns out that there are drugs that do block the pain gate very well. Obviously, the morphine family, the heroin family, the opioids are extremely effective in blocking the pain gates and not allowing the transmission of the sensation of pain up to the brain. So it turns out that um, we do uh, produce some of our own pain blockers. These are called endorphins, and they're produced in our brain naturally. And if you've ever heard about the runner's high or breaking through the wall, we're talking about the idea that at some point, if you're doing intense exercise, your brain begins to produce these pain blockers called endorphins, and it allows you to feel refreshed and continue on in a natural sense of the word. So those are the sensation part of what I wanted to give you. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the perception part. So perception is the way the world looks, sounds, feels, tastes, or smells. And that is according to the individual how all these senses are. Um, what we experience in the world is our perception. If you look at literature, you know that in many ways perception is reality. That is to say, how we as individuals experience the world is the very real sensation that we have, right? So it's very important to note that you can have an influence on how you sense and perceive the world. That even if you get the same input as somebody else, it may depend on how you're processing that input as to how you perceive that same sensation as the person next to you. So I'm going to give you some ideas, some terms that influence the idea of perception in the individual. One of the terms that you need to talk about is filtering, right? Filtering refers to the fact that we block a certain percentage of stimuli in order to be able to function, okay? So filtering of stimuli coming into us is a very adaptive thing, right? As you walk through your day-to-day life, you will find that there's a lot of input from different things. You If you're driving, as a for instance, you hear people honking the horn, you see people passing by you in cars and walking by, and if you were to pay full attention to somebody walking by you, or to beeping the horn, or to driving by you, you'd be so distracted with each of these things that you'd find it very difficult to drive safely. But we are able to filter, right? We are able to sort of automatically include some things and not include some things in what we respond to. This leads us to attention. Attention. How do we attend to some things and not attend to others? Well, attention is defined as a perceptual process that selects input for inclusion into the conscious experience. Okay? So the idea is you have an option to be able to filter out the things that you want to filter out the things you don't want to respond to, and to include the things that you want to respond to. Okay? I'm going to give you a model for perception that will help you to think about it in the right way. This is called the focus and the margin. And if you think about a target, right, in two circles, you'll think about the focus and the margin. The focus is the small circle within the larger circle. Okay? And at any given time, you control the focus meter, right? So you can make the focus very small and focused. Like if you're watching this videotape, maybe you shut everything else off so that you can just really focus intently on what you're doing here. You've narrowed your focus, right? You've cut a lot of the peripheral things out of your perceptual experience. You do this because you want to be able to concentrate, and you want to be able to focus very intently on the stimuli in front of you. Okay? But there are things in your margin, even as you're sitting here watching this tape, as a for instance, can you hear an air conditioner? Can you hear background noise anywhere? Do you sense that somebody is walking in front of you? Those things all influence your focus, right? If you choose to include some of those things in the background, then you're expanding your focus, right? So you started with a very small little focus, and now you're expanding the focus to make it bigger, to include some of the things from your background. We have control over this, and that's a good thing, because you want to be able to, in certain circumstances, be able to attend to a lot of things in your environment. Like, as a for instance, if you were at a circus or at a concert, you want to be able to focus on different sensations, a lot of different sensations. Um, and if you're not at a venue where you'd want to see a lot of different stimuli, then you might want to narrow your focus down so that you're actually very hyper focused on one little thing. Like if you were looking into a microscope, you need to be extremely focused on that one stimuli. So think of the circle in the middle I told you about, and the fact that sometimes it's really small and focused on something, and sometimes you widen it out to focus on a little bit more in your environment. And other times, like if you're in a concert or a circus, you might then want to be able to expand it to a really big, to include a lot of other things. So that's a very good way of thinking about the sensation and perception that we experience in our daily lives, right? So I want you to remember that as you think about sensation and perception and how our senses are perceived by us. All right. So thank you for listening about sensation and perception. Make sure that you are reading in your book about this in chapter 3. And then next session we'll go on to chapter number 4, the next chapter on learning. Okay, so I'll see you